Well, it's a special time for us as we're finally getting a new series of Inside Number 9, which can only mean one thing: watching 6 tales from the minds of Steve Pemberton and Reece Shearsmith and still thinking about them the week after they air. But what does the new Series 7 have in store for us? Well, each week I'll be going through each episode and giving my analysis and general thoughts on them. I did try to do this previously with Series 6 without a script, but yeah, they weren't that good. So now I think it's time to improve on my work and my analysis on this wonderful show. So without further ado, welcome everybody to my review of this episode from Inside Number 9, Series 7. Before we talk about this episode in length, I kinda want to talk about Steve Pemberton and Reece Shearsmith's previous work, The League of Gentlemen. The League of Gentlemen, for those that don't know, was a sort of sketch comedy show with an overarching plot about the lives of the residents in the strange country town of Royston Vasey. The show was mainly a comedy, but like all their future projects, a fair bit of horror and unease was injected into the actions of the bizarre inhabitants. Take for example Tubbs and Edward Tatsyrup, the show's most popular characters and played by Shearsmith and Pemberton, a pair of siblings who are also husband and wife with pig-like faces who run a local shop on the moors of the town, who seemingly never sell any of their precious things to any customers and are insistent that the town must remain local. Now I mentioned this show as I believe the reason why it was so compelling is also reminiscent in this episode, Mr. King. In this episode, we follow Alan Curtis, a primary school teacher originally from London who has moved to teaching another class in rural Wales. Despite the warm welcome from Mr. Edwards, the headmaster of the school, and the unenthusiastic response from his class, Alan begins to feel overshadowed by the class's previous teacher, Mr. King. As the school days go by and the harvest season gets nearer and nearer, Alan starts to notice some strange behaviour among a particular student, Kerry, and he starts to wonder as to what exactly Mr. King did during his tenure at the school and if the staff may be involved. To start off with, I feel that the choice of location for this episode, a school, is something rife with potential, and I'm surprised that hasn't been done on the show before. I mean, this is Series 7, and the choice of an isolated school in rural Wales helps to accelerate the comedy from Alan and his interactions with the school kids. Speaking of which, the child actors playing these characters were great, particularly the young Ellen Owen who played Kerry, as she allows the audience and Alan to gain sympathy towards her at the start until her and the school's true plan starts to show. The humour in this episode is initially showed in the awkward and mundane interactions between Alan and his class, from their lack of understanding in global warming to his attempts of humour with the class to their school assembly, which was done pretty well and realistically. I mean, after all, it is performed by school children. However, the bizarre humour that's prevalent in the gent's other projects is shown in full force later in this episode, like with the misunderstandings between Alan and the school's cleaner Winnie, played exceptionally well by Annette Badland, and the infamous penis inspection scene, which for obvious reasons I can't show in this video. But those who haven't seen it, just be known that this marks the second time Reece Shearsmith has shown his actual bum on one of his own shows before.
We were just discussing a possible arts project.
Oh. I thought he was taking photographs of your cock.
However, we can't really talk about this episode without talking about the twist revealed at the end. In the final minutes of this episode, it is eventually revealed that there never was a Mr. King, instead a man named Mr. Hardy who taught the class previously. But the big twist is that the school are believers in a pagan religion. This includes the staff as well as the children, and since Alan is pure due to the fact that he's uncircumcised, he's to be crowned the next Mr. King and sacrificed in order for the school to have a good harvest. In fact, throughout the episode, it's hinted that Mr. Hardy isn't the first to take Alan's role, and there were even multiple teachers who were circumcised and let go and tried to report the school to Ofsted, but to no avail.
We're a small school, Alan, as you can see, and we've very nearly been closed down a few times, but bringing in teachers such as yourself with all your experience of the world really helps the children grow, you know?
Who knows, maybe the school isn't the only place that practices this ritual. Maybe they've gotten rid of the whistleblowers in order to get rid of loose ends. Maybe Kerry's been working with Mr. Edwards this entire time and they've done this act countless times. This twist may come as a shock to some people, and I'm sure that's what Stephen Reece intended, and maybe I am going a bit crazy with this analysis, but there are clues to this twist hidden in the dialogue, and the fact the classroom is decorated in many nature-filled decorations, which is reminiscent of... Okay, let's talk about this. Now, Stephen Rees have admitted that The Wicker Man is one of their favourite films, and that they would even do a Wicker Man-like episode of Inside Number 9 eventually. In fact, this episode was aired fairly close to Mayday, which may have been a very, very subtle hint. This twist isn't the worst the show has created, and it works for the story well enough. It was hinted at quite frequently in the episode, and there were actually a couple of similarities and nods to this episode and The Wicker Man, which is detailed in this Reddit post by Murricane that I'll link in the description. My main gripe with this twist isn't that it doesn't work or it comes out of nowhere. In fact, it's actually the opposite. This is going to be a bit personal, but I remember seeing a few comments where people were guessing what Mr. King was about, and a Wicker Man plot was thrown around quite a bit. Obviously, since this is Series 7, the audience is now going to notice little hints and guess the twist before it's even shown, but having the episode partially spoiled from me from these comments kind of ruined its impact for me, but the twist was just a bit too predictable irregardless regarding the episode's general premise. Now, as I said before, I think this twist works fine on its own, and it doesn't exactly ruin the episode. On its own, it's a fairly good watch with some good humour and characters to it. To be honest, I've not even seen The Wicker Man yet, both the original 1973 film and the bizarre remake of it with Nicolas Cage, but I feel like if I had, I'd probably get some more enjoyment from it like Stephen Rees would, as they are very big fans of it. The original, mind you. I'd imagine not the remake. The combination of unnervingness and bizarreness creeps its way into the kids' masks and props during the assembly, and especially with Winnie as the Cabbage Queen. Also, can we just appreciate the great costume design in this episode by Eve Barr? Not just with Winnie's costume, but also with the staff's suits and work clothes and the school uniform on the kids. Truly spot on.
You're gonna do my leaks the world of good.
Something I felt was wasted in this episode were the constant red herring shown around the start to the middle, as initially we're supposed to think the episode is actually about Mr. King abusing his students with the school covering it up, but then the actual twist arrives and all is just meant to be forgotten about. Now, despite the subject matter being extremely dark, I kind of think it might work for the show. Keyword here being might, mind you. I mean, we have seen some extremely dark topics brought up on the show, like depression, suicide, childhood trauma and repression, sex slaves locked up in the basement only allowed to eat pot noodles, but I still think that the story is ultimately wasted in exchange for the actual episode presented. Not to mention, the emphasis towards Alan taking pills at the start and his random outbursts at the class seem to come out of nowhere with the information we now have on a second rewatch, as it's now only used to establish why he moved to teaching in Wales instead of London. This could however just be a holdover from an older version of this episode where originally Tom from Tom and Jerry was meant to return as the main character, but that idea was scrapped and instead we now have Alan to fill his shoes. Now, despite its flaws, Mr. King is by no means a bad episode of this show. There are still some good aspects to it, like its humour, atmosphere, and a fairly entertaining climax, as well as some great acting from everybody involved. And I'm sure I'd enjoy this episode a bit more if I watched what it was clearly partly inspired by beforehand. It's sort of like a mini spiritual successor to The League of Gentlemen in its own way. I mean, a concept like a headmaster obsessed with checking their staff's genitalia would feel right at home in The League. As it stands, it's a good episode, but I still feel that Merrily Merrily is a stronger episode from this series. Its twist is a bit predictable, but it more than makes up for it with enough humour and charm to go around.